Canada is known worldwide for its progressive values and human rights. But today, an uncomfortable question arises. Are LGBTQ Canadians being left behind? Are their rights truly safe, or are cracks beginning to show in the system? If you appreciate the work we do and want us to keep creating high-quality investigations like this, you can support us by buying us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/True North Canada First. Every small contribution makes a big difference. Act 1. Canada's reputation versus reality. Canada has long branded itself as one of the most LGBTQ inclusive nations in the world. Since the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2005, Canada has climbed to the top of international equality indexes, often ranked among the top 5 safest countries for LGBTQ citizens. Rainbow crosswalks, pride parades in major cities, and political speeches celebrating inclusion reinforce this reputation on the world stage. But reputations are only part of the story. While laws look strong, lived experiences reveal cracks in the system. Statistics Canada reported that police-reported hate crimes targeting sexual orientation rose by 64% between 2019 and 2021, the largest increase in a decade. In 2023, nearly 1 in 10 hate crimes in Canada were directed at LGBTQ communities. These numbers challenge the image of a completely safe environment. In Toronto, Canada's largest city, and often seen as a hub of diversity, LGBTQ residents still report feeling unsafe in certain neighborhoods. Pride Toronto organizers noted a rise in security concerns, leading to heavier police presence during events. In smaller towns across Saskatchewan, Alberta, and parts of the Maritimes, open displays of identity can still provoke harassment. The global narrative paints Canada as a beacon of hope for LGBTQ asylum seekers, and indeed, thousands apply each year, citing persecution in their home countries. Yet once here, many face systemic barriers, lack of housing, underemployment, and discrimination even in settlement programs. The promise of safety doesn't always align with reality. Media coverage often highlights pride festivals in Vancouver or Montreal, but rarely addresses the day-to-day struggles of LGBTQ seniors who fear discrimination in long-term care, or rural LGBTQ youth who face bullying with fewer support networks. These invisible stories suggest equality is not universal. Reports also show that while urban centres like Toronto and Ottawa have multiple LGBTQ organisations, smaller cities and towns may only have one or none at all. The lack of accessible community centres leaves many people isolated, particularly in northern Canada and Indigenous communities. Even in professional sectors, representation is uneven. A 2022 survey found that LGBTQ Canadians in rural areas are twice as likely to hide their identity at work compared to those in major cities. This creates a silent divide between urban and rural Canada, where laws may be the same, but acceptance is not. The core contradiction emerges. Canada's reputation is celebrated worldwide, but the reality for LGBTQ citizens is often complex, varied, and sometimes unsafe. The question is not whether rights exist on paper, they do, but whether they are truly protected in daily life. Act 2. Workplace challenges. On paper, Canada's workplaces are bound by the Canadian Human Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Yet, despite these laws, surveys reveal an ongoing problem. Many LGBTQ employees still face subtle exclusion and unequal opportunities. A 2021 report by Egale Canada found that 30% of LGBTQ employees in Canada said they had faced discrimination or harassment at work. For transgender individuals, the number was even higher, with 43% reporting difficulty finding stable employment. These statistics highlight a systemic gap between protections promised and protections delivered. Corporate Canada often prides itself on diversity initiatives, with rainbow logos during Pride Month and public commitments to inclusion. However, studies show that many of these initiatives are surface level. Fewer than 20% of Canadian companies have comprehensive LGBTQ inclusion policies that extend beyond symbolic gestures. In industries such as construction, trucking, and oil and gas, sectors with a historically male-dominated culture, LGBTQ workers report frequent isolation. In Alberta, LGBTQ trade workers admit they often hide their identity to avoid being targeted, a form of self-censorship that takes an emotional toll. Pay gaps add another layer to workplace inequality. Research suggests LGBTQ employees in Canada earn on average 7% less than their heterosexual counterparts with similar education and experience. Transgender workers face even wider disparities, often relegated to part-time or contract roles despite qualifications. Beyond wages, promotions and leadership roles remain a hurdle. A study by Catalyst found that LGBTQ professionals are underrepresented in senior leadership in Canada, with only 2 to 3% of executives identifying openly as LGBTQ. The glass ceiling remains very real. Many young LGBTQ Canadians also face unique barriers when seeking their first job. In rural areas, lack of supportive employers means youth may migrate to big cities, creating both an economic and cultural divide. This migration trend can drain rural communities of young talent while intensifying overcrowding in urban centers. The disconnect is clear. Legal protections exist, yet workplace culture often lags behind. Until equality is not just written into law, but lived out in boardrooms, factories and offices, the promise of workplace fairness remains incomplete. Act 3. Government and Social Responsibility. The Canadian government often presents itself as a champion of human rights, with prime ministers and ministers proudly marching in pride parades. But beyond these symbolic gestures, many activists argue that policies remain fragmented and inconsistent across provinces. While some areas like Ontario and British Columbia have well-funded LGBTQ programs, others leave communities struggling for support. Healthcare access is one of the most pressing concerns. Transgender Canadians, for example, face wait times of up to 2 years for gender-affirming surgeries. Hormone therapy programs exist in larger cities but remain scarce in rural provinces. This means equality often depends on postal codes. Where you live determines how much support you receive. Mental health funding is another major gap. LGBTQ Canadians are more than twice as likely to experience depression or anxiety compared to the general population, yet specialized mental health programs are limited. In many parts of Canada, LGBTQ individuals must travel long distances or wait months for inclusive care. Education is another battleground. Some provinces have implemented inclusive curriculums, teaching students about LGBTQ history and rights. Others, however, face political pushback, with debates over whether schools should even allow gay-straight alliances. This patchwork approach creates an uneven experience for LGBTQ youth, depending on where they grow up. Housing programs also highlight inequality. LGBTQ youth make up 20–25% of homeless youth in Canada, yet shelters often lack tailored programs to address their specific safety needs. In some shelters, transgender youth report harassment or being forced into unsafe accommodations, making homelessness even more traumatic. Federal funding exists for LGBTQ organizations, but activists say it is often small and short-term, leaving groups scrambling year after year. This leads to instability for essential services like crisis hotlines, legal support, and housing programs. In contrast, other areas of government spending, such as infrastructure, receive consistent long-term funding. Regional disparities remain stark. Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal boast multiple LGBTQ centres, health clinics, and advocacy organisations. Meanwhile, cities like Regina, St. John's, or Thunder Bay may have only one underfunded community centre, if any at all. This imbalance leaves rural LGBTQ Canadians without the same safety net. Critics argue that Canada's government has perfected symbolic visibility while neglecting systemic change. Pride parades and speeches make headlines, but without consistent policies, stable funding, and nationwide programs, LGBTQ Canadians risk being left with promises rather than progress. Act 4. Rising concerns. One of the greatest challenges today is the rise in hate incidents targeting LGBTQ Canadians. Statistics Canada reports that between 2019 and 2023, police reported hate crimes against sexual orientation nearly doubled. This increase suggests that legal protections have not fully translated into social safety. Schools are a front line of concern. LGBTQ youth report high rates of bullying, with surveys showing that over 50% of transgender students experience harassment. Many schools have anti-bullying policies, but inconsistent enforcement leaves students vulnerable. LGBTQ students in rural areas with fewer supportive peers and teachers often suffer in silence. Homelessness among LGBTQ youth remains a crisis. While only 5 to 10% of Canadian youth overall identify as LGBTQ, they make up a staggering 20–25% of homeless youth. Rejection from families, combined with a lack of specialized shelters, pushes many into unsafe living conditions where they face exploitation. Mental health statistics paint a troubling picture. LGBTQ Canadians are nearly 3 times as likely to attempt suicide compared to heterosexual Canadians. Among transgender individuals, the rates are even higher, with 1 in 3 reporting a suicide attempt. Access to mental health care, particularly affirming care, is critical but often limited. Healthcare inequality extends beyond mental health. Transgender Canadians report frequent discrimination in medical settings, from misgendering by staff to outright denial of care. These experiences discourage many from seeking help, worsening health outcomes. In smaller cities, specialized services are nearly non-existent. Media coverage often glosses over these realities, focusing on colorful pride celebrations while underreporting hate crimes, healthcare gaps, and systemic barriers. This selective storytelling contributes to a public perception that everything is fine when many LGBTQ Canadians live with daily challenges. Generational divides also emerge. Younger LGBTQ Canadians benefit from greater visibility, while older LGBTQ Canadians, especially those who lived through the AIDS crisis, often face isolation in senior care. Reports show LGBTQ seniors fear discrimination in long-term care homes, leading some to hide their identities once again. All these factors, rising hate, bullying in schools, homelessness, mental health struggles, and healthcare inequality, form a troubling pattern. They remind Canadians that progress is never permanent. Rights must be defended, and safety cannot be assumed. Canada's reputation as a global leader in equality is undeniable. But reputations alone do not protect communities. Behind the image of rainbow flags and political speeches lies a more complex reality. The statistics tell the story: rising hate crimes, high rates of youth homelessness, workplace discrimination, and uneven access to healthcare. These are not isolated incidents, but systemic issues requiring urgent attention. For LGBTQ youth, the risks are particularly high. Bullying, homelessness, and mental health struggles create barriers that can last a lifetime. Without stronger support networks, the next generation could face the same battles their predecessors fought decades ago. For workers, equality remains elusive. Bias, wage gaps, and underrepresentation in leadership continue to deny LGBTQ Canadians the same opportunities as their peers. Diversity slogans cannot replace structural change. For seniors, fears of discrimination in long-term care highlight how progress can fade in later life. Many who once marched for rights now find themselves forced back into silence to protect their dignity in old age. These realities do not erase Canada's progress, but they do challenge Canadians to look beyond surface-level celebrations. True equality means addressing gaps, funding services, and holding leaders accountable for more than just symbolic gestures. The question is simple. Is Canada doing enough to ensure LGBTQ Canadians are safe, supported, and treated equally in practice, not just in law? Narrator. Canada has built its reputation as a leader in equality. But the lived reality for many LGBTQ Canadians tells a different story. Rights exist on paper, but are they fully protected in practice? We leave that question with you. If you want us to continue making quality, independent content, please consider supporting us at buymeacoffee.com. True North Canada First. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more Canadians can join the conversation.